Well, thanks for coming, everybody. I'm Jason Kapowski. I'm the Executive Director of the iRODS Consortium, and welcome. And tonight we have Todd Moughamer of Syngenta, who is a senior computational biologist, and he has gratefully agreed to tell us all about their pilots. All right, thank you.
So, thank you, Jason. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Thanks for inviting me to talk on this opportunity, and to Bonnie and to Stephanie for organizing and promoting. I'm Todd Moughamer. I'm a computational biologist at Syngenta. I have another hat that I wear there, and that is I am the data management lead for our DNA sequencing platform. I'll make sure I get this working. So I'm at Syngenta, and a little bit about Syngenta. We are a leading agricultural company. At the end of the day, for us, that means we sell seeds and we sell crop protection chemicals, pesticides, herbicides. We are global. We have about 28,000 employees worldwide, and we're in about 90 countries. From an R&D perspective, we have about 100 R&D facilities. A lot of them are breeding stations that tend to be regional. But just to give you another idea of how global we are, here are some of our R&D sites. As well as having a global breadth, we have quite a breadth in our portfolio. So we sell seeds on everything from the big guys of corn and soybeans, all the way to seeds for okra, tomato, spinach, a lot of stuff in between that. We have a lawn and garden business with ornamental flowers. So I don't think anyone else has such breadth in portfolio or organisms. And then, of course, along with that, as a crop protection company, we're also interested in all the organisms that are pests to those organisms. So a lot of things we're interested in terms of organisms. And when we're researching these things, one of the tools we have nowadays is DNA sequencing, because we want to understand what's going on in the genome of these organisms, what's going on in the gene expression, so forth. And so we have a keen interest in DNA sequencing capabilities. Sorry if you guys have seen this slide too many times in your life. I know I have. But basically is showing the curve of the cost of DNA sequencing alongside Moore's law as a trend there. And so what it's just showing is that for a long time, we've had a cost reduction, a reduction in the cost of doing DNA sequencing. And about 10 years ago, we had a really big drop. And that was brought about by the introduction of some new technologies to the DNA sequencing market. And we collectively started calling these next generation sequencing technologies. It's not a good term because this has been going on for 10 years. There's not much next about it. But along with the reduction in cost, and everyone who has a lab got something on their workbench to generate DNA sequence, came the downstream effect of all of these research organizations needing to deal with a whole bunch of data. And so data storage became much more important, and how you're managing that data as well. To give you an idea for what's being generated, I think these numbers are correct. The most popular or most talked about platform is Illumina. I think their HiSeq can generate up to 700 gigabytes of GZIP compressed data, sequence data, in just a few days. That's just the output data, not anything intermediate. So it can be a challenge if you're running these platforms and generating all this data. So at Syngenta, this is how we've kind of set ourselves up to deal with the situation. And it's kind of evolved over the years. One of the things Jason wanted me to talk about was kind of our use case And so maybe I wanted to differentiate us from maybe other people that are doing working with DNA sequencing data and trying to manage it with iRODS. So we are not a core lab. We are not someone who are just sitting around trying to be a sequencing center and generate a lot of data. We do have sequencing in-house, but we also do a lot externally. So I consider us more of a diverse consumer of DNA sequencing technology and methodologies. So along with our internal platform, where we have some select vendors who we have close partnerships with and crank a lot of data out through them. We have a lot of collaborators and collaborations we get involved with, some of them public, some of them private, so we're getting data from them. And then there's the public repositories such as NCBI's Short Read Archive. And so we're bringing all this data in, and what we do with it is basically put it on our file system, our Linux file system. And we basically set one up, we call it the Ingest repository. We have just a few people who have permissions to add that data to that repository. We call these people the data ingesters. They also are responsible for collecting the metadata. And where they put that metadata is right now mainly in spreadsheets. So, let's see.
Are the spreadsheets also kept in the file system with the NGS data?
For the most part, not.
Oh.
It's not the case. They're basically centralized elsewhere.
And then it's coordinated through file path.
Basically, we have the file path that is entered into that metadata spreadsheet. And I have a dotted line there, that relationship, because, it's not dark enough. But it's dotted line because there's no hard connection. And so basically, most of our data, once it's in there, gets analyzed. And we have a Linux compute grid where most of that is run. Now, we also send a lot of our data out to various other collaborators to get analyzed. And we do have some internal automated pipelines. So when the data gets in, you just automatically run something. But those are quite rare. Some of the reason for that is a lot of the processes, if you're doing one thing on corn, you might not be able to do that on okra, using that example, because their genomes are quite different. Let's see, we do have a data management plan we put in place a long time ago. It exists. It kind of directs how we organize the data and how long we're going to keep it. But again, getting to these very faint lines I have here, dotted lines, there are some weaknesses with this, which you guys could probably yell at many. The first one is when you're keeping your metadata in a spreadsheet, it's hard to keep those things up to date. If you have to move the data, and we occasionally do, data centers move volumes or shift data around for various reasons, change technologies. So that becomes a problem. There's a lot of human curation that's going on there, and sometimes they mistype something. Files get renamed because they get compressed and so forth. And so that's a problem. And then if you have a data management plan that requires that you know what your data is, and your metadata is not really tightly coupled, it becomes hard to really actively manage your data. So just kind of hitting on some of those same topics. And last year we did a review, kind of formalized some of the things that could be improved in our setup. And of course, metadata, getting them out of spreadsheets would be nice. Getting away from just using a POSIX file system as essentially the interface that users had. We do something better. As I mentioned, it's hard to drive your data management plan when your connection to the metadata is precarious. We like the idea of being able to manage our data across multiple volumes of storage and even potentially across geographically separated storage volumes. And then finally, we would like to be able to run audits, run reports about our data, just to tell us more about what we're really dealing with, understand the trends. And then the other thing that has happened leading up to last year was that we didn't just stick with this process for the last 10 years because we loved it. We've made attempts to either improve the way we generate metadata or the way we catalog that metadata. And basically, we haven't been successful in making it stick. And I'll talk specifically about why one of those failed. That being said, this situation, as much as there are dotted lines there and potential errors, day to day, we get our data where it needs to be analyzed on time. And so most of the things we want to see improvements on are about improving data access, particularly when people need to go back and look at older data. And just for our IT department, our sysadmins, to be able to manage that data a little better. So they're not really, it's never really a pressing crisis for our research organization.
Is what you've got on screen for your local office, for your local set of people, or is this is the global system?
Yeah, that's our global system.
Lots of these around the world.
No, we have one NGS repository.
Okay.
But we do, which we just sometimes have data in other locations.
Yep.
I'm saying that because there's some things in transition. So, yeah. So anyway, things are largely working, and we're all busy and don't have a lot of time to recreate something new, especially if there's no crisis. So how do we do that improvement without a major interruption to our current situation? So that informed our pilot that we wanted to do. And so the first thing we want to do is partner with some experts instead of just trying to download it and put it together ourselves. So I went to Jason at some point after knocking on a few doors and said, hey, I'm trying to hire a consultant who can work in iRODS. Do you know anybody? And he said, yeah, us. So that sounded great to me. You guys are down the street. So set up that partnership. The other thing we wanted to do, because in the past, these past attempts I was referring to, we spent too much time thinking about our old data, our legacy data, the stuff that isn't being analyzed and may never be again. And so we had a developer implement a system that basically cataloged everything, and then they kind of forgot to do the ingest part. And they put something together, it just wasn't well. I shouldn't say they forgot. They just didn't do a good job. The developer went on, it broke and fell over, and as time quickly went by, we had to move on from that. So, oh well. So we're going to focus only on, or mainly on getting the new data in. That was going to be a priority. And if everything works out, we can add legacy data down the road. Also, just to control scope, we wanted to focus just on the sequence data and not on the results data yet. Again, we can do that later, but because there are so many different analysts, it just created a larger pool of users that would be interacting directly with iRODS. We wanted to keep it a little controlled. And then finally, to kind of keep the impact light, we wanted to just interject this new pilot into our existing processes. So one of the things we did was, since we're already keeping data or metadata in spreadsheets, we're going to just use those spreadsheets to help drive our ingest process. Another bit is we did want to leverage our data management plan a little bit and start separating our active data from our data that's just being stored. Right now we're just piling it on, and basically when a volume fills up and someone needs to move some old data around, it's kind of a scramble to figure out what needs to move and where it's going to go. So some more details about the pilot. how we set things up. We did a single zone. Everything in parentheses that says RENCI is stuff that the team here did for us. Everything else is probably a mixed bag of who did it. But set up a single zone implementation, set up cloud browser with iCommands. And then we did, Jason did a bulk ingest of some of our more recent data sets. And then that gave us basically a canvas which we could work to take some of that old metadata and start, not old metadata, the more recent metadata that was available, and start figuring out how we were going to structure that. And so we figured out what our minimum set of metadata would be, and also started looking at some things like we can have multiple samples of data stored in one file, so how do we deal with that? So one thing we had to do was put some of our sample metadata into JSON strings values that we added to the APU. Also, basically created some roles that give us, basically created 2 user roles using the roles engine. And basically we have the role of data ingester. And these data ingesters are the same people we have that were copying the data before, but they also have the ability to add metadata. And anyone else we have in the system basically can just look at the files. And then finally, we set up an active tier for data that is actually going to be computed upon. Here's a cartoon. I guess I needed some more pictures, so I made them. Again, we have iRODS there in the middle. We have the web interface. We have the command line interface. And then the thing that we added in is our ingest script. And this is just a Python script that takes that metadata sheet and does the load to iRODS. We have our storage tier. That's just vaults that are in the background. And then we have an active tier that we set up. It's a resource, an iRODS resource, and that's mounted to our Linux computer. And the active tier to get data in, that's all driven by roles, and it's just we set an active status to true, data will get replicated. So getting into the details here a little bit. So our ingest scripts, so just to compare and contrast a little bit, in the past, our ingesters would just do a copy of the files into our repository. They'd record the metadata into a spreadsheet, and then there was another Python script we wrote that would just check against that, like a manifest, just say, here are all the files there. And when it did this, it would also just write to a shared log file that drove some other information, just saying, hey, I checked in this file. It's in the system. So with the new process, we just have one script. They take the spreadsheet that already exists and run the ingest script on that metadata, and it'll do all the loading, register the metadata, and also still will do that logging step that I'm talking about, because again, we're trying to keep our processes the same as much as possible. But in addition to that, we're validating the metadata now. So there's roles within that script, just do some sanity checks on it. We even feedback to the users, hey, you're loading this much data, this many samples, this many projects of data, just to allow them to just make sure, is this really what you want to do? And then we also just check to make sure you're not going to be overwriting anything within that ingest or from what's already in iRODS. Anything else on there? Other things we did with that. We have another log file that just records the processes that the ingest script is doing. So there's the central log and then kind of a more detailed log along with that. And then had it write some backout scripts. So if something goes wrong during the ingest process, or they didn't like the metadata, they can just run a shell script that already exists, and it'll just back everything out, either the metadata or the files themselves. So this is written in Python 3. I'm leveraging pandas basically to manipulate the metadata. And I'm just making calls to iCommands right now. And I put on there that we did do testing on that, unit testing and some behavioral testing as well. I guess I just put that there because coming from computational biology and research, we don't always have testing done on our code that we get out there. So trying to make that a push and an emphasis lately. Any questions? So the active data tier, how do we set that up? So in the past, basically right now everything tends to go into one place. We have one volume we kind of keep with our most recent data. And then when that starts to fill up, the admins come to us and say, it's starting to fill up. What do we need to do with this other data? And so we try to figure out which of the bunches of data, which of the studies can be moved. And we give them a list of the oldest stuff we have, and they'll do an rsync, hopefully running the checksums when they do that, to move it to some other volume. And then someone's supposed to update the metadata. So with the new process using this active data tier, once again, our data ingesters can drive this. They can set a metadata value in iRODS, and that'll just cause it to replicate to this active volume. And when that's changed, when that value is changed or removed, it's trimmed out of that tier. So no need to manually copy files or update spreadsheets. Again, this is just an iRODS resource. We call it the Ingest active resource that we've implemented. Active state is our attribute that we leverage there. And let's see what else. Yeah, and this is just basically when it does do that replication, we just make the data, run Chmod on it and change the permissions so they can be read. And this is all done in the iRODS role language, leveraging the MSI exec command microservices to the Chmod. And once again, here I wrote some test scripts, which were critical to make sure I was getting the behavior I wanted out of it. And I think I'll always do that.
What did you learn most by writing the test scripts?
Did I learn?
I mean, in what way were you surprised by how things? Why didn't it work the first time you wrote a test script? What did you have to change to make it before you were happy with it? Like as you were writing the test, you probably learned more about how it was working. So I'm curious to find out what was hard about that.
Nothing was really hard about it. It's just a new way of doing things.
Mm-hmm.
But you found the payoff from doing it, though.
I guess that's what I'm saying. Yeah. It's absolutely there. It really comes. How do you measure that confidence that you know that thing is working the way you want?
Sure.
Sometimes it's hard to put a dollar figure or an hour figure on that stuff.
You have checksums everywhere? Is that?
Yes. Yeah, we do outputs here, and we put dash capital K to do all the entries. Absolutely. Surprised I didn't put that in here because I do that.
Are you running any validation
part of this?
After the data at rest has not been modified or corrupted or anything?
No, I'll be talking to you about that next year or sooner.
It sounds like you're keeping a lot of data for a long time, like you have a policy of retaining all this data already.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, we do. We keep it for a long time. We revisit that at some point, but you can't really delete data if you don't know which data it's okay to delete, or you can't find it.
The curse of data.
Who has the authority to change your restricted access value? Who makes
For this one,
that
it's our
decision?
data ingesters. So this is, just talk about this next. So the use case we were originally ignoring was having to restrict access. And for the most part, by default in our organization, we keep data open so anyone can look at it. But there's certain situations where either a project or a lawyer is coming in and saying, I only want this person to look at this data. And we had like one use case of that in our previous repository, but we had a few other use cases come up. And so we figured we better deal with it so it's not a blocker. And so what we did is set up another rule. Basically, so in the past, we would just have an admin run the Chmod on it, and it would be locked out. Usually to just a user. With the new process, we can once again just have a data ingester. And we only have one rule. It's like super powerful data ingester people and everyone else. We kept it simple. It's really the approach there. We're going to have to expand our rules in the next year for sure. Got pinged on that today, actually. And so what the data ingester can do is basically add that metadata tag, a new one, and basically is, we're using the full triple there. It's restricted access, you set it to true, and then the units is actually a Linux user. And so, and when it's invoked, when that data gets copied over to the active tier, the permissions will also be changed so that only that group will be able to read, only members of that group. And so that has been working. And of course, when that gets deleted, the permissions will go back to open. The trick there is that iRODS, the user running iRODS, has to be a member of that group so we can continue to control the data. And so basically all it means is we can use any Linux group, or we can set up a Linux group. So an admin still needs to be involved there, but changing the permissions is just a matter of having someone, our data ingesters, who can add that metadata tag.
And that group is through your central authentication authorization infrastructure? Or is it just local with the server? I don't remember.
Our central
Yeah, you
identity management system. No. So basically, we have a local authentication system in our local data center. And so that's for historic reasons, trying to change that. And so it's just setting up a group in our local data center. So it's still not the greatest thing in the world, and I'm not super comfortable with how the groups are necessarily managed themselves. I think we can do a better job there. But it's a big organization, and identity management is top of the list, and everyone keeps running from it.
Yeah, due to architectural reasons, like iRODS couldn't just automatically create a group. I guess is sort of what I was getting at, because there's considerably more machinery at play.
Yeah, I mean, it would be something interesting if we could do that. But right now, we have enough identity management for challenges. I think it's still much better than what we were doing.
Right. Was it Cyverse is using Grouper? I think it's Grouper out of Internet too. So Grouper. That's
I'll tell the people when they start fleeing the room again. But there's Grouper. So this rule once again is set up again in the role lang, and just using that same microservice to check to go do the Chmod, and then we also have a precaution in there to make sure that group actually exists, and otherwise the rule will fail. and also to make sure that iRODS is a member of it. And once again, testing. It's critical. So our status date, or maybe to 2 weeks ago when I sent this to the lawyers. So we opened for new data ingest in November, and we've been phasing out a lot of our older NGS repository, loading data that hasn't already been loaded into it. There's still some that are in active projects, so that's going to take a little more attention to kind of transition them over, especially if they have automated work. We'll get there. We've probably halved our repository that primary repository is probably cut in half already.
So it's a pilot, but it's a production pilot.
It's an aggressive pilot.
Yeah.
Well, you're deleting data, so that's.
Yeah. Well, here, the other reason we have limited storage resources, so it was when you're starting to put that data in there, you kind of have to give some of that space back, and I promised them to give it back. The other thing is we realized it's kind of we see it as low risk. Because once that data is in the vault, we just it's just another file system. We just remount it, change the permissions so people can see it again.
Yeah.
Data is there.
Right.
Do you generate status reports on what's actually in the system?
Not yet, but that's definitely on the horizon. I really want that. That's why I really would like to have the legacy data in there too, so we can look at the trends, which members of our research community have generated the most data. How much Okra data do we really have?
Have you considered the audit plugin yet, though?
Say again?
The audit plugin?
No.
So we can, we can dump almost pour all of the activity into Elasticsearch or something like that. And you can generate reports on every data object if you feel like it, or trends or what have you.
Looking forward to hearing more about it. Like one of the things that I want to do, and I did mention it to you, is we need to have a kind of an application software post hoc review. Some of our engineers and some of you guys at the consortium, and basically say, hey, what are the things we could do better? What are the things we need to go back and fix right now, and try to help steer how we do it to make it more robust. I think right now, from my experience setting things up, we haven't had much trouble. Users have been happy so far. It's early. iRODS has been up for some time, but now that we just started really putting new data in, that's things really going to heat up. So we're going to have some burn-in time over the next few months, and start getting some more feedback.
Is the scale on the order of 1 billion, 100 million, 10,000?
Our scales right now, how much? I want to say, I haven't checked. I want to say we're actually a surprisingly small number right now. I think on the order of 20,000 objects right now. Again, we're only dealing with a subset of our collection right now, so that number's going to easily keep growing out.
So that'll depend upon what you're using for your database technology.
True. When do you guys usually start to see that become an issue? How many objects?
100 million?
100 million? Okay.
Yeah, the Cyberus has hundreds of millions at this point, and they just have 2 Postgres servers.
Just with 2 Postgres.
Well, they've offloaded a lot of things to ancillary databases. too.
I see.
But so the indexing, so starting to export, especially to export query off to away from your operational data store, that seems to be the real trade. And just let the catalog be transactional.
Yeah, we'll definitely be looking at the database, particularly for backups. Right now, I'm just doing a dump and doing a nightly dump. That's okay for now.
What is the capacity of the Postgres database?
with pool, you can now cluster these suckers.
You know, PostgreSQL.
Yeah.
It depends on your use cases. So for Cyberse, they have 2 Postgres servers that are doing streaming replication. They have 50,000 plus users at this point with a couple thousand simultaneous connections. But, you know, as Mike said, that's just for authentication and managing the index, and they have externalized a number of the other things like the metadata store and so on. So it depends on really the use case. Is it heavy on the number of data objects, heavy on the number of metadata attributes attached to the data object, or do you have 50,000 users and people are trying to list the home collection?
It's really about the joins
Yeah.
between all those 3 things. So if you have a lot of users and a lot of metadata and a lot of objects and a lot of groups and permissions and stuff.
Yeah, like, you know, you have, 100,000 users, you know, try to browser your data, you know,
you're gonna need more RAM.
public, you know, if that PostScript is good enough for people query those data, you know.
Right.
You
Because
can always
your
get like,
iPad.
you can change the database to rack or something like that.
Observations from the pilot. As I said, iRODS has been up for a while and it's been stable throughout the pilot. I've chunking in 1,000 files one day and throwing, you know, terabyte files at it the next. Happy how all those are performing. Test script was quite crucial, and I think again I wasn't very familiar with the rule language. I was leaning a lot on JSON for things when I got stuck, and making sure that things worked as I expected them. Really needed that test script. So we'll continue to do that. It'll be useful because I'd like to potentially move to the Python API. Because I write Python. A lot of other people do. We did run into some challenges there. I think the last one we had to deal with was we discovered that we were trying to block downloads. We're trying to prevent proliferation of data. So we're trying to push people to this active data tier to get their data and not downloading it to wherever they want. So we did a block on the iGet command, and interestingly, it didn't have the same effect on Cloud Browser.
Right.
And then when we went to go refactor it, we thought we had it fixed, and there was something with the file size, which was the criteria, was missing from the context string. So we had to, or Jason had to write a workaround. But things like that come up. I don't know why I put this in there because I never even asked about it, but it'd be nice to have some custom error messages. I presume we can do that. Just because I have a lot of things that dump with kind of arbitrary messages. And there are some Cloud Browser UI issues. You guys already know about them. I'm flagging them here because I get to hear about them regularly. So just to put some emphasis on them. The long metadata values overriding each other, and the query operators don't show up depending on the order of how you select them.
Can you explain a little bit more? Can you expand on that last one, the query operators missing when using more than?
Can I just send you the issue that you already own?
Yeah.
Send you a link on that. But as you're aware of it, I think you've already. I actually think it's solved. I think we're just a couple versions behind. I think you already tagged it for a release.
Gotcha. All right.
And I wanted to have really Cloud Browser's been great, Caesar. So I'm not trying to pick on you there. Future interests. This is an incomplete list of things that came to mind at the time. But again, we want to update our version, start leveraging the Python APIs, and the other thing is to implement an archive tier. So we have an active data tier. We have kind of the core storage tier, but create this archive tier. And that's, I say perhaps cloud hosted. probably certainly cloud hosted. And then we need to start looking at our analysis results data. It's going to be a lot of cat herding. And then, gosh, I had a cloud browser on there again. Put maybe Selenium in place so we can start doing some tests on cloud browser, make sure everything's consistent on the command line and in the browser.
You wrote to test twice, just find that.
Oh, I think he wants to test it, is what he's saying.
Yeah, you can submit that issue online. I'll get into the next revision. Surprised the lawyers didn't catch that.
Well, I hope you'll join the working group that I'm sure Jason has already formed on the MetaLinks cloud browser follow-on, and if you think about employing that going forward.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. Is this?
It's the web browser that EMC donated to the consortium. And
Okay.
so we're starting to kick tires on that as maybe the follow-on cloud browser.
Yeah, I didn't hear about that.
And that's what we're using it at IHS as well too.
Okay.
The follow-on. So that's where all the sort of developer cycles, I think, going forward are going to be.
Okay. My thank yous to people. I just want to especially call out my data ingesters. These people, it's an ungratifying job because they're doing their diligence, in tracking the metadata, everything, and sometimes there's a character off and you can't find file easily. But they really do a lot of work and are really dedicated to doing their best to keep the metadata up. And I also ping them a lot for the testing during this, so I need to highlight them. And of course, the high performance computing team who run our Linux cluster here, who have been quite helpful. The team here, if other people were working on this effort, besides Jason, Cesar, and Carol, I just didn't see your name. I didn't have a direct conversation with you, so I wanted to highlight those of you who did interact. My boss, Chris Martin, and members of our cross-functional NGS sequencing platform team. Includes people that are in the lab generating the data, the analysts that are analyzing it, and some IT folks. Any questions, Maria?
So you mentioned briefly that you have some workflows automated, and I was wondering whether you have it integrated with iRODS. Are you planning to have it integrated with iRODS, and what tools or platform do you use for that?
Yeah, that's great question. It didn't come out. I think I trimmed that from my talk here. No, we are not. They are not tied with iRODS yet, and so we're not doing that. I think it's something we might look into. So now that we have a pilot, and I will next try to make it more robust, maybe expand the scope of data we're managing. The next thing we might do is start working up and downstream. So when I say downstream, I'm thinking about instead of these spreadsheets, we should probably be talking to our laboratory information system and pulling the metadata in. So we're not doing that, but we have a lab. I remember.
Don't we have clarity? I don't remember.
Yes, we do.
So, and it's not talking to clarity yet.
No, and it does so get into the nitty gritty. So for things that are processed through Clarity, and not everything is, we have one of those spreadsheets is dumped, or pieces of it are dumped and added to another spreadsheet. So it's basically a Clarity LIMS report that we had custom made to output the metadata that we want from it.
Mm-hmm. And that becomes your metadata spreadsheet that you ingest with.
Correct.
Do you have Clarity 4 or 5?
I haven't been.
I mean, basically, do you have your users upload the enter the metadata into Clarity, or?
run away from laboratory information systems.
Good for you.
I try to avoid them. I try to stick around the researchers and just let someone else figure that stuff out. So I don't follow it. My memory serves is there's a template spreadsheet that people use to submit samples, and that gets slurped into Clarity. As it goes through the Clarity workflows, additional metadata is collected through the process.
We just got Clarity in.
Good. It's been fairly. I've had bad interactions with laboratory information systems. This one's been working for years now, so it's good.
I still don't see how it's going to interact with iRODS. We're not there on that part yet. Right?
Yeah.
So
I'm imagining we will probably have.
report. So you are interacting with that through the Clarity report.
Yeah. And so the next step is just we're already doing a little bit of integration. I actually dump our list of study identifier projects to a file, and because that's one of the required pieces of metadata we have. So everything has to have a Clarity identifier associated with it. So I already do a dump. The next thing to do would just someone who knows Clarity can write me a query to get our metadata report. Instead of looking in the file, we just call the database.
When you start managing analyses across 100 labs around the world, will you have to go to a federated environment?
Depends on where our analysts are going to be. It's possible. And we think about that a little bit, not so much as an IT organization and R&D organization. We think about that, but for NGS data, we're just not there yet. But we do work in other data centers. We have other collaborators and other compute grids that we can work on that are available to us. And I can imagine if we do more of our sequencing analysis there, we'll need to set up maybe a new iROD zone and set up there to manage that data. And, I was thinking that would have to happen this year, but just isn't, the use case isn't there, the need isn't there yet.
A long time ago, we set up a federated data grid across data grids in 17 different countries. So you could really move data all the way around the world.
We have a number of data centers and partners we work with. It's almost, most of our analysts are here. Most of the guys that are installing the software that they need are here, so people just log in and analyze it remote. But there are things afoot. If trends continue and the cost of sequencing continues to go down, so a lot of this data is generated for genotyping. So basically, keep it simple, to help breeders understand which plants they need to breed together. And a lot of our breeding in these spread out areas is done in very remote places. They don't have great bandwidth in the middle of the cornfield. So we might need to decide, is this something we're going to need to do to bring all this data together or to share it? There's a little bit of policy decisions that need to be made about our data. But that's one thing that could cause us to have further proliferation, because the sequencing could be happening in a field somewhere. Thanks for your attention.